Eastern Conference Finals, Game 7, Boston, Miami. These two teams have faced off against each other so many times over the last several years in this exact position in the Eastern Conference Finals with a trip to the finals on the line. This time it was Boston that prevailed. They held on barely in the final couple of seconds of Game 7 to win 100-96. So here's the interesting thing about this series. The first 5 games of the series really weren't that intriguing or that competitive at all, right? Jimmy Butler took over in Game 1. Boston responded after Butler dropped 41 in the opener to take Game 2, a blowout. Game 3 was one of the only few close games that we had in the first 5 games of the series, but still a couple key quarters is what pushed Miami and Boston to blowout wins. Game 4 was obviously a blowout for the Celtics. Game 5 was a little bit closer, but Boston still dominated. They won by 13. So the first 5 games of the series, you can argue 3 of those games ended up becoming blowouts, and they were all decided by huge quarter eruptions, individual quarter eruptions. Only one of the games in the first 5 games of the series was actually competitive, and that was Game 3. And Jimmy Butler didn't play in the second half of that game, dealing with his knee inflammation. And then Game 6 and Game 7 occurred, and they were absolutely fantastic. They were absolutely what you hope for and what you fantasize and crave at this stage of the year. And then it culminated with just an all-time Game 7 performance, from narratives, from storylines, from just the way that these guys competed. It's everything you could have hoped for. It's what we as NBA fans absolutely salivate for in a Game 7. You want high emotion, you want high intensity, you want absolute competitiveness, every guy leaving it out there, them looking absolutely exasperated and exhausted on the court, and that didn't disappoint. All those things were the case. But here's the interesting thing about Game 7, and in particular Game 7 in this series. It's not always, and it's not often, that Game 7 perfectly encapsulates a series, because of the peculiar nature of a Game 7, because of the fact that it's win or go home, because of the fact that it's a do or die game. We see this in March Madness all the time, how sometimes these one and done situations, they don't always produce the result that we're expecting, because of the nature of it's a single elimination game. And in Game 7s of the NBA playoffs, they don't always, again, result the way that we expect them to. And they don't always embody what a series is and how a series can be defined. But in this particular case, this Game 7 yesterday perfectly encapsulated what this series was about. This was a perfect snapshot, a perfect microcosm of this series between the Celtics and the Heat. The Boston Celtics, a much more talented Boston Celtics team, jumping out to an early lead, an incredible start in this Game 7, facing a feisty, undermanned, under-talented Miami Heat team. And yet, through sheer will and determination, the Heat kept chipping away, and had an opportunity for a go-ahead shot with 16 seconds left by Jimmy Butler. The Celtics led. Obviously, they jumped out to that quick 20-7 start. They led by 12 with 5 minutes to go. They led by 13 with 3.5. They led by 10 with 2 minutes. And they led by 7 with 1 minute remaining. And yet Jimmy Butler still had a go-ahead 3 with 16 seconds left. And he missed it. But the fact that Miami was even in that position to begin with speaks to that competitiveness, speaks to that intensity and that relentless mindset, that refusal to cave, that refusal to acquiesce under the bright lights. It was absolutely spectacular. And here's the interesting thing. I love Jimmy Butler. He was a one-man wrecking crew, not only throughout the series, but especially the last couple games. And in game 7 in particular, he played all 48 minutes, wasn't given any breaks, no respites for him, drops 35. And obviously, he had just dropped 47 points, 9 rebounds, 8 assists in that epic game 6 performance on the road in Boston at TD Garden. But initially, he was the only one that showed up for the Miami Heat. Bam Adebayo ended up contributing in a big way with 25 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists. But beyond those two, and really beyond Jimmy Butler's 18 points in the second quarter, the Heat really weren't given many opportunities, and they didn't receive many contributions from those ancillary parts. Kyle Lowry, I know he ended up dropping 15 points, but he shot it terribly. It was 4 for 12, 1 for 6 from the three-point line. Max Strus didn't really start cooking till the second half, and that's including the 3 that got overturned. He ended up finishing with 8 points. And by the way, on that 3, I don't think it was definitive that the back of his heel hit the sideline. And even if you think that it did, the fact that the refs went to review it 4 or 5 minutes later, I think totally changed the complexion of that moment. Because the Heat kept thinking they're within 7, they're within 8, they're within 9 points, and instead it's ballooned back to 13. And that was, again, the story every single time. The Boston Celtics were dominating almost every aspect of this game. And every time the Heat managed to pull within single digits, the Celtics just continued to inflate the balloon a little bit more. And the lead kept getting pushed a little bit bigger to 12, to 13, to 14. Of course, they led by as many as 17 in the first half. So, but going back to Jimmy Butler, obviously this is a guy who had put Miami in this position, not only with his game 6 heroics, but even game 7. You could see he was absolutely exasperated. And he pulls up for 3, down 98-96. And I can't fault him for it. We can't really criticize him for that shot attempt because of everything that he had devoted and poured into this game, into this series, and what he's meant to Miami. You have to live and die with your best player taking that type of shot, making that decision. Of course, in 2020 hindsight, could he potentially have driven it past Al Horford? Potentially. But in that moment, you have to ultimately decide what you think is best. And Jimmy Butler felt like, you know what, I didn't want to go into overtime. He wanted to win it on his home floor. The arena absolutely would have erupted. It obviously looked low, but it looked on target initially when he shot it. And I think it was a good shot for him. You really can't criticize him. But again, outside of his heroics and what Bam provided you, Kyle Lowry, Max Strus, little sprinkles down the stretch. Oladipo had a nice little stretch of 9 points, but you didn't get any production from PJ Tucker. Tyler Hero, your 6th man of the year, averaging 21 points per game. He really couldn't go. He played 5 minutes in the first half, gave you nothing. You didn't get anything from Gabe Vincent. So really from top to bottom, you had 2 guys that kept the Heat afloat in the first half. Really one guy who then inspired Bam, who couldn't quite rub the rest of the pixie dust onto the other guys. And that was the game. But again, every single step of the way, Boston was just dominating. The Heat, you could just tell how laboring it was to try to get off a shot. It was either Jimmy Butler's creating and he's going to shoot for himself, or Kyle Lowry is playing in the pick and roll with Bam. That was their offense. Because if they don't get some of those offensive rebounds, the Heat aren't even in this game. That's how good Boston was defensively, preventing easy looks around the rim. But the offensive rebounds gave some of those shooters some looks. And then you combine that. It's compounded by the fact that the Heat were abysmal from 3. 6 for 30 from the three-point line. Boston nearly doubled that mark, 11 for 32 for the C's. And again, yet, in spite of all that poor shooting, they're still in that position. Again, it's quite remarkable how that even occurred, and that's where we finish is with Marcus Smart, because at this point in the game, 5 minutes left, The Celtics are firmly in control of this game. And Marcus Smart, listen, you have to take the good with the bad with Marcus Smart. You love his energy, you love his confidence and what he means to the Celtics, especially defensively, defensive player of the year. But he makes some boneheaded plays, and some of his decision making late in games just baffles me. The fact that he took the final 5 shots of the game for the Celtics, the only other shot was an offensive foul committed by Jaylen Brown when he elbowed Bam in the face up 98-93 under a minute to go. But outside of that, the 5 official shots down the stretch were all taken by Marcus Smart, and he missed them all. So if you're Jason Tatum, if you're Jaylen Brown, if you're Ime Udoka, you're going to have to sit down and probably talk with Marcus Smart for the finals. Like, hey, man, I know Tatum is getting doubled down the stretch of games, but you can't be the one taking all these shots. But needless to say, as much as it kind of pains me to admit this because I'm a Lakers fan, I do think, though, the Celtics were very deserving of punching their ticket to the NBA Finals. There is no way to say that this Celtics team didn't deserve to be in the NBA Finals. I think that you look at the path that they took the path of most resistance. They went through hell and back. They had to play into the fire. They dismantled, obviously, the Nets, KD, Kyrie, and 4. They went through Giannis and the reigning defending champion Milwaukee Bucks, albeit without Chris Middleton, who I do think if he was playing likely would have pushed the Bucks past the Celtics, but the Bucks were fortunate with the injury bug last year. You need sometimes to have those breaks. The Celtics had a lucky injury break against the Bucks. They took advantage, and now they dismantled the Heat in 7 games. They just wore down Miami over the course of 2 weeks, and now they're in the NBA Finals. And I just think that a lot of these guys on the Celtics are very likable. It's hard not to like this team. Jason Tatum is a very humble superstar, very classy move to pay homage to Kobe, wearing his armband. Jaylen Brown, I think, shows a lot of humility. He has great composure. He's kind of he kind of plays with a blue collar, grab your lunch pail and go to work type of mentality, despite the fact that he is a star in this league. You've got Marcus Smart, who's gritty, who's tenacious, who plays elite defense. Al Horford's a likable guy. Derek White is a likable guy. And then Ime Udoka, I just love his demeanor. And he does kind of have this aura about him as a coach. Even immediately after they won Game 7, his speech was pretty candid. And he didn't really allow for much room to celebrate Game 7 and lose sight of the NBA Finals, which is the next step. And I just love the way that he continues to challenge his team. And so this is not a cocky Boston Celtics team at all, which I think you really have to respect. And they've truly been tested. They have faced a lot of adversity, not only in this series. They won Game 6 on the road in Milwaukee, but over the last several seasons, they've experienced heartbreak. Jason Tatum's obviously been to the Eastern Conference Finals 2 other times, lost both other times. Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart, this is their 4th trip to the Eastern Conference Finals, but they had lost their first 3. And finally, they were able to break through. So big congratulations to them. It was a tremendous, tremendous final couple games of the series, but they were very much deserving. And I think that the fact that they've managed to endure all those hardships and now finally break through, I think it's hardened them. And now it sets up an incredible matchup in the NBA Finals. So cannot wait for that.